Thank you, Fred, for that welcome and for the Institute's generosity in hosting the release of the Chicago Council's report on agricultural development in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. We have enjoyed, thanks to Fred's openness, a very productive collaborative relationship over the last few years, and we're extremely grateful for your interest, Fred, and your cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you all for taking the time out of what is an extremely busy Washington these days to hear about this report on renewing American leadership in the fight against hunger and poverty, the Chicago Initiative on Global Agricultural Development. The report is the result of a project organized by the Chicago Council beginning in July 2008 with the active encouragement and certainly the generous support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The purpose of the project was to raise awareness and certainly to stimulate policy and public debate, principally at this point in the United States, on the importance of agriculture, of agricultural development, to alleviating poverty in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And it follows on the importance of the United States government making possible through its own leadership and its own extraordinary resources, and not just financial resources, but its institutional resources, to address the problem of productivity, particularly on small farms in those regions. That's an issue vital not only for the regions, but for global food security. To address these issues, the Chicago Council organized a leaders group co-chaired by Catherine Bertini and Dan Glickman to bring together a total of 12 individuals, themselves included, many of them here today, I'm happy to say, prominent figures in the academic, former policymaking worlds, members of Congress, and international organizational leaders dealing with issues of food and agriculture, development broadly, and foreign policy. The leaders group was assisted by an excellent group of a committee of experts chaired by Robert Thompson of the University of Illinois. Senior project consultant Robert Parlberg, who was sitting in the front row of Wellesley College and Harvard University, drew on his own enormous expertise as well as his amazing writing skills to author the report, to draft the report on behalf of the leaders group. And I'm deeply grateful to Rob for his commitment to this. David Joslin has been project director on behalf of the council for the effort, and council staff members Lisa Ekman and Hal Woods provided superb and unstinting support to the entire project throughout what has been a very fast-moving process of just now 7 months since the project got underway. None of this would have been possible without the early and generous support, indeed the vision, of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As you all know, the foundation has in recent years, more than any other single American organization, brought agriculture back into our focus and its critical relationship to global poverty. The Foundation's Chief Executive Officer and President, Jeff Rakes, I'm very pleased to say, is here with us today and has agreed to say a few words. Jeff Rakes became Chief Executive Officer and President of the Foundation in 2008 after a 27-year career with Microsoft, where he rose to be the president of the Microsoft Business Division. But for our purposes, his most salient qualification is that he grew up on a farm in Nebraska, not far from Omaha. And today he still owns and runs that farm with his brother. So he has taken a very strong personal as well as professional interest in the agricultural development program of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we're delighted he could be here with us for the release of the report Jeff, would you please come and make some comments?
Well, thank you. It's a great opportunity to be here. And Fred, I really appreciate you hosting this. You alleviated my hunger. I appreciate the group, and I appreciate all of you being here today. In particular, many of you have contributed to this important work directly, and all of you care about these issues, and we really thank you for that. I especially want to thank Senator Lugar for his unwavering dedication to these issues, both in hunger, but also the amazing potential of agricultural development. He's been an unwavering voice in that regard. And likewise, I'd like to thank Congresswoman McCollum, whose leadership on international development issues and her commitment to people in the developing world is something to be admired. You know, this report covers a lot of ground, and you're going to hear many perspectives today. And I'd like to focus just a little bit on why the Foundation supports agricultural development and why we think the renewed focus on agricultural development could be truly transformational. As many of you know, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been heavily invested in the issues of global health. That's been a top priority since the foundation really was combined in the late 1990s. But recently we embarked on the opportunity to see what were the opportunities to help people in developing countries beyond global health. And really in particular, how to help people lift out of hunger and poverty. And this led to the newer investments in agricultural development and financial services for the poor. And as Marshall mentioned, this is particularly exciting for me. I loved growing up on the farm in Nebraska, where corn and soybeans feed cattle, do soil conservation work for other farmers. But I also remember as a young boy the opportunity to spend some time with my father, Ralph Rakes. My dad was unusual. Not only was a farmer, but he cared a lot about the issues of agriculture, both in our country and around the world. Right after World War II, he visited Europe with a number of other farmers to help advise on the rebuilding of European agriculture in the aftermath of World War II. And I found as a young boy people visiting our farm, farmers from around the world coming to our farm, and when we went to other countries, we visited farmers. That was the thing that I grew up with. And everywhere in the world, I had a chance to visit and connect with other farmers. I was struck by the passion that people had for agriculture, for food production, and what it could do for others. And so I was very lucky as a young boy to have that passion for international agriculture instilled in me. And so I saw that power of how agriculture can be a transformational force. I was very lucky on Monday to spend some time with Dr. Norman Borlaug. Most all of you know him as the father of the Green Revolution. And he continued to talk. He's almost 95 years old. Yet his passion, his focus, his sense of commitment to these issues, he impressed upon Raj Shah and I the importance of the continuing commitment to agricultural research, the need for real political commitment by governments to shape the right policy and to have the right investments in agricultural infrastructure. He was very pointed with me about his view that we should not have cut the funding of agricultural research starting in the early 1980s. He wanted me to remind people that we have to be vigilant against issues like wheat rust, and that requires an ongoing commitment. And so we used it as an opportunity to learn from Dr. Borlaug how we could improve our own commitment to the issues of developing agriculture in the developing world. Now, we know that agricultural development has a proven record of poverty reduction. The advances in agriculture during the Green Revolution doubled the amount of food produced. It saved hundreds of millions of lives, and it really laid the groundwork for even better, even broader development in Latin America and South Asia. Over the past 2 years, the Gates Foundation has committed over $1.2 billion for improving the lives of smallholder farmers, and we're in particular focused in on sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and we're going to continue to invest and learn. We're investing across the value chain. We're looking at the opportunities to use better technologies, better science in terms of crops and livestock, better farm practices, soil and water management, and improve the smallholder farmer links to markets and to have the appropriate infrastructure to support that, including better data and better research to shape the policy environment. Now, as I mentioned earlier from my conversation from Dr. Borlaug, unfortunately, we know that much of the world disinvested in agriculture over the last few decades, and that included here in the United States. And it is our hope that the recommendations that you see in this report will act as a catalyst for the U.S. government and others to reverse this trend by renewing their commitment to the fight against hunger and poverty through agricultural development. We all know there's been a long tradition of excellence in agriculture, the great land grant universities, organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation, and great American individuals like Dr. Borlaug. And despite these declining contributions in agriculture that I've referenced, the U.S. is still the single largest donor to agricultural development in the world. And we think with a renewed focus on agricultural development, the U.S. government could help create opportunities for millions of poor farming families to lift themselves out of hunger and poverty. And the foundation, the Gates Foundation, absolutely intends to be ready and supportive partner in these kinds of efforts. And we encourage the U.S. to reclaim the global leadership in agricultural development. Both the substance and the example of these actions would be truly transformational. So again, I want to thank all of you for your commitment to this opportunity, your time today, and working together to help these people lift themselves out of poverty and hunger through better agricultural development. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Glickman. I'm sorry I'm a little late, but the gate arrangements at Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta were not cooperative this morning. But better late than ever. Before I introduce Senator Lugar, I think that it is appropriate to introduce the leaders group, the folks that worked with us on this report. I think that, Marshall, you introduced Rob and Bob, I think. But I'm not sure exactly who's here, but I'm going to introduce the folks, and if they would stand up, and then we could hold the applause to the extent there is any applause until they're finished. Let me go ahead and do that now. Carol Bellamy, Eva Clayton, former Congresswoman colleague, Tony Hall, former Congressman and colleague, Peter McPherson, Phyllis Oakley, Rich Williamson, Bob Thompson's been introduced, Doug Beerider, Tom Pickering, Per Pinstrup Anderson, and Pedro Sanchez. Let's give them a hand. They worked very hard on this report. We have a great treat to hear from, I think, one of the truly great members of the United States Senate, and I say that without patronizing him, because as far as I'm aware, he's not going to be in a position to vet or confirm me in the near future. But he has been in that position before, and he knows more about my personal life than a lot of folks do. But he is the most senior Republican in the United States Senate, serving his sixth term as the senator from Indiana. He is the ranking member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, former chair of the Agriculture Committee in the Senate, and I was privileged to serve many years when I was in the Department of Agriculture with Senator Lugar as the chairman of that committee. He has an unprecedented record of working for change, whether it's in nuclear nonproliferation or whether it's in farm programs, agricultural issues. He is a man of great integrity and great independence, and I think the Founding Fathers had Dick Lugar in mind when they created this great country of ours in terms of the type of person who would serve in the legislative branch of government. Most recently, in collaboration with Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, he introduced the 2009 Global Food Security Act, which is a 5-year authorization to focus U.S. development assistance on long-term agricultural productivity and rural development. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you one of the great leaders in America and our friend, Dick Lugar.
Well, Dan, thank you very, very much for your introduction, for your friendship throughout the years, and your extraordinary leadership. And I thank all of you for inviting me to be a part of this important release of the Chicago Council report on food security. I thank especially Fred Bergson, the Peterson Institute for International Economics, for supporting this particular event. And likewise, it's been great to hear from the Gates Foundation. I enjoyed a special privilege in having a conversation with Bill Gates about a month ago, and his passion, his intelligence are really extraordinary in leadership in this area. I want to say that also I met with Dan Glickman and Catherine Bertini as they began their work, had some idea of the outline, the ambitions of the project. Since then, we've had other opportunities to share our perspectives on global hunger. I want to thank them especially, though, for their leadership, and I thank Marshall Bhutan, President of the Chicago Council, David Jocelyn, the project director, as well as numerous prominent contributors to this report, some of whom have been identified by Dan a few moments ago. The Council on Global Affairs has been a trusted voice in foreign affairs since its founding in Chicago in 1922. This report represents another valuable contribution by the Council. I was especially pleased by the report's focus on the benefits of research, of education, technology, extension. These elements are a major component of the Global Food Security Act of 2009 that I've introduced with Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania earlier this month. As we know, food prices began a steep climb in the fall of 2007 and continued to increase during 2008. The increases pushed an additional 75 million people into poverty. And while prices have abated somewhat in some countries, millions of people still face difficulty in food access and availability, and malnutrition rates in many parts of the world remain alarmingly high. We live in a world where nearly 1 billion people suffer from chronic food insecurity. The World Food Program reports that 25,000 people die each day from malnutrition-related causes. Health experts advise us that a diverse and secure food supply has major health benefits, including increased child survival, improved cognitive and physical development of children, stronger immune system function, including resistance to HIV/AIDS. Prolonged malnutrition in children results in stunting and cognitive difficulties that last a lifetime. And these severe humanitarian consequences of hunger are sufficient cause for the United States to bolster its involvement in agricultural assistance and global food security. But I believe we have an even bigger problem. The global food supply is increasingly at risk from a set of forces that threaten the fundamental welfare of a large share of the world's population. Thomas Malthus famously warned 200 years ago that food production would not keep pace with population growth. But Malthus did not foresee how technology and innovation would increase food production as the population grew. The problem we face now is that advancements in agriculture technology have been lagging. even as a dangerous confluence of factors threatens to severely limit food production in some regions of the earth, and the world's population continues to expand. Between 1970 and 1990, global aggregate farm yield rose by an average of 2% per year. But since 1990, aggregate farm yield has risen by an annual average of just 1.1% per year. The USDA projects that growth in global farm yields will continue to fall during the next decade. As a farmer who has seen agricultural yields more than triple during my lifetime on my family's farm in Marion County, Indiana, I have faith that human ingenuity can avert a Malthusian disaster. The Green Revolution produced high-yield seeds and improved agricultural techniques that resulted in a near doubling of cereal grain production per acre in just 2 decades. But we have to have time for innovations to take root, and we have to apply all the agricultural tools at our disposal. As the Chicago Council's report makes clear, governments are falling far short of what is needed to guarantee food security. In fact, in some parts of the world, political and social forces are moving us farther away from food security, even in the face of severe warning signs. Here are the basic parameters of the problem as I see it. First, the world's population is projected to increase to about 9.2 billion people by the year 2050. Growing affluence in China, India, and elsewhere is increasing demand for resource-intensive meat and dairy products. If this trend toward richer diets continues, those 9.2 billion people may eat enough food to feed 13 billion people at today's nutritional levels. Based on projections for population growth, rising income, and more meat consumption, it's estimated that the world's farmers will have to double their output by the year 2050. Secondly, food security is closely tied to energy costs that will continue to be highly unpredictable. Energy is a major factor in food prices because farming is an energy-intensive business. Crops have to be transported efficiently to market, and petroleum-based fertilizers and pesticides are used in many agricultural systems. Although oil prices fell dramatically during the last 8 months, perhaps because of global recession, the basic vulnerability remains. Energy price spikes in the future are likely to hit with even greater ferocity than the spike we experienced in 2007 and 2008. And moreover, if peak oil theories are correct, at some point in the next few decades, we may see sharp declines in supply that will raise fossil fuel costs to unprecedented levels. Third, water scarcity is projected to increase in coming decades in response to population growth, urbanization, land use pressures, and the effects of climate change. According to a recent report by the Royal Institute of International Affairs, 500 million people currently live in countries with chronic water shortages. But that figure is expected to rise to as many as 4 billion persons in the year 2050. The International Food Policy Research Institute projects that unless nations invest in crop research, water management, and rural development, farmers will be unable to increase their use of irrigation, and farm yields will suffer. One model estimates that by the year 2025, cereal production could be 300 million metric tons below what could be produced with adequate irrigation, representing a loss equivalent to the entire U.S. cereal crop in the year 2000. Fourth, these factors are converging at a time when global climate change is challenging farmers on every continent to deal with changing weather patterns, different agricultural pests, and new water conditions. These changes could cut food production in many parts of the globe, especially in the southern hemisphere. A report by Sir Nicholas Stern estimated that a 2-degree Celsius increase in global temperature will cut agricultural yields in Africa by as much as 35%. Thus, farmers around the world will be asked to meet the demands of global demographic expansion, even as they may be contending with a degrading agricultural environment that significantly depresses yields in some regions. Now, despite these alarming trends, investments in agriculture have tumbled in recent decades. By 2007, rich countries devoted a mere 4% of their foreign assistance to agriculture. This represents neglect of what should be considered one of the most vital sectors in the alleviation of poverty. In Africa, which has the most severe food problems, donor aid to the farm sector plunged from $4.1 billion in 1989 to just $1.9 billion in 2006. Africa's per capita production of corn, its most important staple crop, has dropped by 14% since 1980. The United States contributed to this investment decline. According to the Chicago Council's report, and I quote, the share of total U.S. development spending that went to agriculture fell steadily and sharply from 25% in 1980 to just 6% in 1990 and 1% in 2003. End of quote. Equally troubling are sharp cutbacks in research into new technologies, farming techniques and seed varieties that could increase yields, cope with changing climate conditions, battle new pests and diseases, and make food more nutritious. World leaders must understand that over the long term, satisfying global demand for more and better food can be achieved only by increasing yields per acre. And increasing acreage under production will not satisfy the growth in food demand. Recent studies have demonstrated that funds spent in agriculture can be up to twice as beneficial to economic growth as spending in other areas. It seems, therefore, that our overall foreign aid strategy would benefit from restoring agricultural programs to at least their former prominence. The seemingly inexplicable retreat from agricultural development has been caused by a number of factors. The genuine success of the Green Revolution caused some governments and populations to become more complacent about food production. People understand that droughts, disasters, and bad government create famines. But there is little understanding of the systemic pressures on the global food supply. And with the exception of food calamities, the effects of malnutrition are subtle and gradual. In an age of instant media where global attention is directed to the disaster of the day, the constant drain of malnutrition and hunger draws less attention. Consequently, donor resources are more likely to be devoted to immediate emergency relief efforts than to long-term agricultural development. The sense that the food problem was fixed is compounded by the increasing urbanization of the world's population. In 1975, about 37% of the world lived in cities. This figure rose to 47% by the year 2000 and may reach as high as 60% by 2030. There simply are fewer individuals who have a personal stake in agricultural production or a basic understanding of the practice of farming. In addition, many donor nations have focused on development programs for urban areas because of the expectation that the most efficient means of generating economic growth was to be found in cities, where transportation is less of a problem and commerce is monetized. This trend was reinforced by some recipient governments that have favored infrastructure projects and urban-focused development assistance for political reasons. By its nature, agricultural progress is more diffuse, less dramatic, less politically useful than other types of development that impact high population areas. In those nations afflicted by corruption, agricultural assistance also may offer less of an opportunity for diversion of funds than an expensive infrastructure project involving numerous contractors. Finally, the agricultural policies of both developed and developing governments have too often conflicted with global food security. In particular, a trade policy that's focused on protecting domestic farmers rather than creating well-functioning global markets. In addition, many governments, especially in Europe and Africa, have rejected biotechnology advancements that are absolutely necessary to meet future demand for food. Opposition to safe GM technology contributes to hunger in Africa in the short run and virtually ensures that much of the continent will lack the tools to adapt agriculture to changing climatic conditions in the long run. I cite these political and perceptual conditions to underscore that achieving the necessary gains in agriculture productivity is unlikely to happen through a simple shift of resources. Resources are very important, but the United States and other like-minded nations must also begin to change the views of people around the world. We must create a deeper understanding of the challenges facing us and rally a global effort behind rapid improvements in agricultural productivity and food security. If we fail in this task, many more people will die of hunger-related causes than are dying now. We also are likely to experience increasingly frequent food riots and perhaps warfare over food resources. We almost certainly will have to contend with mass migration and intensifying health issues stemming from malnutrition. With these factors in mind, Senator Casey and I have introduced our Global Food Security Act of 2009. This bill is not meant to be a comprehensive solution to the problem, which really is far beyond the scope of a single bill, but we are hopeful it will serve both as a practical starting point for improving U.S. and global efforts in this area and as a rallying point for those who agree that food security should play a much larger role in our national security strategy. The bill is a 5-year authorization that elevates the priority of long-range agricultural productivity and rural development within our broader development assistance efforts. It establishes a special coordinator for food security within the Executive Office of the President and charges the coordinator with developing a whole-of-government food security strategy. The bill authorizes nearly $10 billion over 5 years for agricultural productivity and rural development. Among other goals, it attempts to improve research capacity at foreign universities and the dissemination of technology through extension services. Universities and research centers are vital in achieving technological advances that are appropriate to local conditions. As such, the bill calls for increasing collaborative research on the full range of biotechnology advances, including genetically modified technologies. The bill also improves the United States emergency response to food crises by creating a separate emergency food assistance fund that can make local and regional purchases of food where appropriate. I believe that achieving global food security is an opportunity for the United States, and we are the indisputable leader in agricultural production and technology. But a more focused effort on our part to join with other nations to increase yields create economic opportunities for the rural poor, and broaden agricultural knowledge could begin truly a new era in United States diplomacy. Such an effort could improve our broader trade relations and serve as a model for similar endeavors in the areas of energy and scientific cooperation. There is no good reason why nearly 1 billion people should be food insecure, or that the world should have to endure the social upheaval and the risks of conflict that this insecurity causes. We can bring America's dedication to science, innovation, technology, and education together to lead an effort devoted to overcoming the obstacles to food security. I applaud the Chicago Council's commitment to global agricultural development. I look forward to working with each one of you to improve the United States and global efforts to alleviate food insecurity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Lugar. That is an extraordinary statement of the challenges and the opportunities we face in the field of agriculture, and I know that for all of us, your leadership is going to be critical in moving forward to make that, your vision, a reality. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to turn to a presentation of the report, the key findings and recommendations by our co-chairs, Kathy Bertini and Dan Glickman. Their leadership of this effort was absolutely critical to its success to this stage. They have given extraordinarily generously of their time, their energy, and most importantly, their ideas and their experiences to the effort. So I'd like to ask Dan and Kathy now to come up and take their places, and at the same time, would the other members of the panel please take their places on the stage as well, so that we can move seamlessly from the presentation of the report's findings and recommendations to their commentary. And I turn the mic over now to Catherine Bertini, who will begin the presentation.
Thank you, Marshall. There's a compelling rationale for the U.S. government now to restructure its foreign assistance to include significant efforts to support agricultural development throughout the world, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Senator Lugar has very well argued that, so what I have to say is in part repetitive. But when we look at the numbers of people who are living on less than $1 a day, the numbers of people who are desperately hungry, when we know that those numbers have increased because of the volatility of food prices and other issues, and when we know that those people who are farming in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia are primarily women, 80% of the farmers in Africa are women, and at least 60% of those farmers in South Asia are women, we know not only is there a lot of work to do to support their needs, but special work to be done to support the special needs of women who are involved as farmers and as caregivers and taking care of their families as well. When so many people are malnourished, and when such a large percentage of people live in rural areas, of the poor and hungry live in rural areas, we know we have to look at supporting this population. As we have currently structured American foreign assistance, it does not support agricultural development. Senator Lugar has just given us some statistics about that. In the past, we have been supporting agricultural development. It has gone down precipitously, and there are several areas where we think the Chicago Council of Global Affairs believes that we could increase and strengthen in an effort to reach hungry people throughout the world, and particularly in these two regions. Agriculture development has fallen off our development agenda. We must put it back on. As a result of the decline for agricultural support, we cannot, if it continues, we cannot see significant improvements. Agriculture productivity, as Senator Lugar has said, has decreased in sub-Saharan Africa. Both sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are dealing with issues of climate change and water scarcity. Population in both regions is climbing. The number of people who are food insecure, therefore, has increased, and the number of people living in deep poverty in Africa has significantly increased. We must change our efforts so that we can help turn around these statistics. We do look also, however, at a renewed interest in African governments in improving agricultural production and raising their own priorities for increases in agriculture. And we do look at new groups like the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, which is formed specifically toward renewing agricultural development in Africa, as significant new steps or recent steps that can help in this area. This is certainly not just an American issue, but the U.S. can lead the way in renewing the interests of donors and others in working in partnership with African governments and African institutions in an effort to help support African farmers, as well as farmers in South Asia. Why should we do this from a U.S. perspective? The national security benefits that Senator Lugar made reference to certainly are very important. The commercial benefits, the issue, the idea that if we support the development of vibrant markets in Africa and in Asia, that will, over the long term, be beneficial to U.S. commercial interests as well. And, of course, the institutional benefits to not only our own institutions, but to other institutions around the world on whom we rely for the development of new scientists and new leaders in agriculture and in other areas. We believe that the recommendations in this report can help restore America's standing and influence by having the U.S. say agricultural development is important, and we want to highlight the work of agricultural development and of farmers throughout the world. And certainly President Obama has already put this on his agenda in his inaugural address, and we want to help provide the recommendations for his administration and for Congress to be able to implement the hope of flourishing farms. And finally, it's certainly our moral responsibility. We take that very seriously as Americans when we think about ending hunger. We spend billions of dollars on food aid, billions of dollars to help keep people alive. But we know that Americans also feel it's extremely important to combat global hunger by helping farmers become more productive. In fact, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs survey says that 42% of American people believe it's very important to combat global hunger and believe it should be a foreign policy priority. We know, as Senator Lugar said, that investments in agricultural development will have a large impact. In fact, IFPRI, and we can hear from the head of IFPRI in a short time, but IFPRI estimates that if only increased public investments in agriculture research are doubled and then sustained and targeted toward these regions, 270 million people will be able to lift themselves out of poverty by 2020. A huge number, and that is just with agriculture research. We are recommending much more. But what we are recommending, we believe, are modest proposals, reasonable proposals, and proposals that will be easy to implement, proposals that will form a base of work to change the direction of our foreign policy priorities into agricultural development, but form a base for others to build on, our government, NGOs, foundations, other governments around the world, foundations to build on working with our partners in Africa and Asia in order to be successful in building the physical institutions and infrastructure that's required to be able to reclaim the role of supporting hunger and supporting farmers and the women and men whose work is to decrease hunger and increase agriculture production and improve their economies. We have specific suggestions, and my co-chair, with whom, just from his introduction of Senator Lugar, you found out is a pleasure to work with. If we could only remember some of what Dan has shared with us during this long process, we will all be better for it. Dan Glickman.
Thank you. I just would like to add that to work with Kathy and Marshall and others who have a commitment to these issues that's historic and deeply felt has had a great impact on me personally. I'd say the following, to bootstrap on what Kathy said. The group came up with 5 recommendations. It's in the full report, and 21 action items. I'm not going to repeat all of them because you can read them, but I think a couple things I would like to say. Number one is the principles and priorities that underlay this report are, 1, that our country has a paramount national interest in reducing world hunger and poverty. 2, that recommendations must target sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, since these are the areas where poverty and hunger are furthest from being solved. 3, women should be central to any development approach. 4, the U.S. approach to agricultural development should be based on reciprocal partnerships, which will require the sustained leadership of the President of the United States and members of Congress. 5, the U.S. should respect, nurture, and support local initiatives and leaderships, and this initiative represents a small but transformative step towards reducing hunger and poverty in Africa and South Asia. But the most critically important requirement for implementation and recommendations is U.S. leadership at all levels, government, and private sector, and nonprofit world, and in particular the interest and commitment of the President of the United States and the Executive Office of the President and the cabinet agencies under his leadership. And in addition, what will be required most is action by the President and Congress. The cost of these proposals is about $3.4 billion over 5 years, which we believe in the big scheme of things is relatively small. Now, looking at specific recommendations, Recommendation 1 is increased support for agricultural extension and education in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. To achieve these goals, the U.S. government should increase USAID support for students in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia to study in the U.S., increase the number and extent of American agricultural university partnerships with universities in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, support education, research, and extension services in the developing world, expand the agricultural program of the Peace Corps to better reach women and smallholder farmers, and provide a technical assistance program to developing country governments to set up school feeding programs. Recommendation 2 is to increase support for agricultural research in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And the U.S. government should do this through the National Agriculture Research Systems in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, the Consultative Group on International Agriculture Research, and collaborative research between scientists in those regions of the world and scientists at U.S. universities. 3, we recommend we should increase support for rural and agricultural infrastructure, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. In that region today, 70% of all rural dwellers live more than a 30-minute walk from the nearest all-weather road. Investments in rural infrastructure carry the largest rate of return in terms of poverty reduction. The goal of the U.S. should be to lead the way for support for infrastructure development and raising this to an important international level to ensure that enough assistance goes to the needs of rural poor. And so, as a part of this, we encourage a revival of World Bank lending for agricultural infrastructure and accelerate the dispersal of the Millennium Challenge Corporation funds already obligated for rural roads and other agricultural infrastructure projects. I might add that $2.8 billion has been allocated towards infrastructure needs in Africa alone, but only a small percentage of these funds have been currently dispersed. Recommendation number 4 is to improve the national and international institutions that develop agricultural development assistance. And one in particular is to restore the leadership of AID. Give it a direct relationship with the Office of Management and Budget. And the administrator, we believe, should serve as chair of the MCC and head of the President's emergency plan for AIDS relief. We also wish to rebuild USAID's in-house capacity to develop and administer agricultural development assistance programs. In 1990, USAID employed 181 ag specialist foreign service officers. Today, 22. From 181 to 22. We're recommending an agricultural staffing level of 135. We also recommend improving interagency coordination for these assistants by designating a deputy on the National Security Council to assure active interagency coordination, and to create a new interagency council on global agriculture to coordinate all of these development activities. The council would be co-chaired by the NSC deputy and the administrator of AID. Regardless of what structure we do in this area, and there may be differences of opinion on this, for these initiatives to be successful, strong executive and congressional leadership is critical, because that will determine whether the U.S. really will implement these policies. So we talk in our report about strengthening the capacity of Congress to manage agricultural development assistance policy and improving the performance of some international organizations such as the FAO. Recommendation number 5 is to deal with U.S. policies currently seen as harmful to agricultural development abroad. And so what we have recommended is, number 1, increase funding for local purchase of food aid and scaling down monetizing of American food aid. 2, we encourage the repeal of current restrictions on agricultural development assistance that might lead to more agriculture production for export in poor countries in possible competition with U.S. exports. And that was created years ago as a result of the soybean involvement in South Latin America, often called the Bumpers Amendment. We recommend repeal of those provisions. 3 is review USAID's longstanding objection to use of targeted subsidies, such as vouchers, to reduce the cost to poor farmers of key inputs such as improved seeds and fertilizers. 4, revive international negotiations aimed at trade-reducing, distorting policies, including trade-distorting agricultural subsidies practiced by many countries in the world. And 5, adopt biofuel policies that will place a greater emphasis on the use of non-food feedstocks. The total cost in implementing these recommendations in year 1 is $340 million, and the initiative would scale up over the following 4 years, reaching full funding of about $1 billion in year 5. When fully funded, this initiative would account for 4.5% of the total annual U.S. assistance budget. So in summary, I would say that this is an opportunity, as Kathy has said and as Senator Lugar said, to reintroduce America as a leader in this world and a force for positive change, and is so perfectly compatible with the message being promulgated by President Obama. And we believe that the initiative will have a significant and lasting impact on our international partners as well. Thank you all very much.